Welcome to Stages of Freedom and Voting in the Age of Breonna. We are board members Cheryl Jordan
and Connie Jordan. We are grateful to the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and Arbella Insurance Foundation for making this event possible. We want to acknowledge Rob Dimmick, creative director of the project, and Darius Henderson Jr., our editor and Zoom manager.
This two-part series is devoted to exploring civic lessons that can empower young Black voters to engage in the political process so that all of us may advance to a more equitable and inclusive society.
In part one, you will experience the political courage of ancestral Black Rhode Islanders through a series of exciting dramatic presentations and a talk with Ray Rickman about the political battle to save Lippet Hill, a vibrant Black Providence community from the wrecking ball.
In part two, you will experience the voices of young Black voters, the wisdom of national and local public servants, and the innovation of the New Georgia Project as it fights for every Black vote.
Thank you for joining us.
Voting in the Age of Breonna.
A breath of gratitude for whatever comes to mind.
A breath for all of the ancestors we bring to this moment. May we learn from their stories told and untold.
A breath for Indigenous people, Indigenous wisdom, and the constant daily grief of colonization.
A breath for the Pequot, the Nipmuc, the Niantic, the Narragansett, the Wampanoag, and other Indigenous people who have a relationship with the earth space that has been colonized into Rhode Island, from where this meditation is being shared.
A breath for all the lives lost, by name and not forgotten, to the horror of white supremacy and slavery, past, present, and future.
A breath for the free Black souls resting at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean.
A breath for the woman who hanged herself on the first voyage of the slave ship Sally.
A breath for Eleanor Eldridge, the first Black person to plead a case in the Rhode Island Court of Law in 1837.
A breath for Frederick Douglass, who contributed to Rhode Island's fight for Black voting rights in the 1840s.
A breath for Alexander Crummell, whose passionate letter to Rhode Island State Legislature helped Black men to win the right to vote in 1842.
A breath for Thomas Howland, Providence's first Black public elected official in 1857.
A breath for George T. Downing, a Black restaurant owner on the Underground Railroad who fought for equal education and interracial marriage equality in the late 1800s.
A breath for Maricha Lyons, who appeared before the Rhode Island legislature in an effort to desegregate schools and succeeded in 1866.
A breath for Reverend Malone Van Horn, the first Black person elected to the Rhode Island General Assembly in 1885.
A breath for Roberta Dunbar, Black freedom fighter who was part of the formation of Providence's League of Women Voters and the Rhode Island National Women's Party in 1923.
A breath for all BIPOC and allied freedom fighters, named and unnamed, of the past, present, and future.
A breath for BIPOC youth, past, present, and future, who suffer at the hands of the violent school-to-prison military-industrial complex.
A breath for BIPOC women and femmes, past, present, and future, who suffer from a patriarchy of silence, marginalization, and disempowerment on top of a system designed to enslave, colonize, and oppress.
A breath for all women and a collective call to protect the divine feminine.
A breath for LGBTQ plus youth, past, present, and future, who suffer from the violence of the cis-hetero patriarchy.
A breath for the strength and conviction to do the work, to speak through action and change, to vote, to teach, to unlearn, to uphold and protect our collective liberation.
A breath for unity, healing, and global compassion.
A breath for earth, ocean, sky, and all living things.
A breath for the moon, the sun, and all the stars and matter in the universe.
A breath to thank yourself for your practice today.
A breath for freedom.
Gentlemen, the undersigned colored citizens of Rhode Island desire to enter our solemn and earnest protest. We are unwilling that this sore, grievous, and unwarrantable infliction should be made upon our already bruised hearts, without lifting up our voice in clear, strong, and decided remonstrance. The article to which we refer disenfranchises that portion of the community generally entitled colored. The reason of this proscription is seen in the terms employed. It is the existence of the fact color. We regard this proscription as unwarrantable, anti-Republican, and in tendency destructive. And as such, we protest against it. We are mostly native-born citizens. We have lent our strength in the cultivation of the soil and aided in the development of its resources, and have contributed our part to its wealth and importance. We have long, and with but little aid, been working our way up to respectability and competence. Is a justification of our disenfranchisement sought in the want of our Christian character? We point to our churches as our reputation. Our intelligence? We point to our private schools, well-filled and taught by competent teachers of our own people. This day, were there no complexional hindrance, we could present a more than proportionate number of our people who might immediately, according to the freeholders' qualification, become voters. We know of no authoritative standard where the right of man to participate in the privileges of government is predicated on their personal appearance. We know of no system of political ethics in which rights are based upon the complexion of the skin. We can find no nation that has the temerity to insult the common sense of mankind by promulgating such a sentiment as part of its political creed. We are confident that no such explanation of American republicanism was ever made by the father of this country. Nay, we appeal to that great written character of American liberty, the Declaration of Independence, in support of our protestation. We claim that to deprive the colored people of this state the immunities of citizenship on account of the color of the skin is anti-Republican. What can be expected of a people when they are told, when their children are taught, that they are regarded so far beyond the pale of common human nature that they need not expect the rights which are readily granted to others? Is it not destructive of humanity to frame such laws whose tendency is to quench honorable ambition and beget a sense of inferiority, to lessen the consciousness of individual worth and manly character? Surely it must sicken the soul and eat out the hearts of any people. We have thus expressed our sentiments in opposition to the proposition that would disenfranchise the colored people. And it is the warrant of history when we say that thus striking down off from us the dearest boon, the precious birthright of free men, that yet the course of God's providence, the poisoned chalice, may be returned to the lips of those who departed from their principles, and retributive justice place them under severe restrictions and endurable chains. We must, to the candor and enlightenment of your respected body, in the influence you can exert by all human feeling, by all regard for principle, we entreat, do not this great wrong to us.
Hi, I'm Eleanor Eldridge, and I was born free on March 26, 1785, in Apponeog Ward, Rhode Island. I started working when I was 10 years old. I worked hard, and I could best any man. And eventually, I owned and operated two very successful businesses. So around
1824, I decided that I was going to move to Providence. And with the money that I had saved and the money I was still earning, I was able to buy 2 homes. A little small place in Warwick, and then a big, beautiful home in Providence. One summer, my brother and I decided that we were going to visit family in Massachusetts. But halfway there, I got so sick. I'd come down with typhus. Couldn't go any further, so I had to stay in a room above a tavern. Now, I stayed there for over a month. And when I got back to Providence, I found out that a rumor was going around that I was dead. And because of that rumor, the sheriff took it upon himself to auction off my house for $1,700. Now, I'm here to tell you my home was worth far more than $1,700. So the first thing I did, I went downtown and I hired one of the best lawyers in the state, Joseph L. Tillinghast. Now, he looked over my papers and then he told me that the only way I was going to get my home back was to fight. Go into court and fight. But unfortunately, he could not go with me. To say I was scared is an understatement. But I couldn't just let them take my property away from me just because I was colored and a woman. Now, I work for some very prominent women. And when they heard what happened to me, they got their husbands to write letters attesting to my hard work, good conduct, and my honesty. Now, don't get me wrong, I appreciated those letters, but I knew if I was going to get my property back, I needed more than letters. I alone was going to have to fight for what was mine. I had to leave behind the fears of the unfair treatment that colored people face every day. I realized that the only way to get my property back was to gather my courage and loudly voice my beliefs and fight for what was right. I found myself in court over and over again. And every time I was in court, I thought about how with one stroke of a judge's hammer, I was deprived of the fruits of my honest labor. No. I was determined to get my home back. Each time I went to court, there was another obstacle that they threw in my way, hoping that I would quit. But I am no quitter. I knew that I was right. And I just refused to be intimidated. So I kept going to court, kept fighting their arguments, and eventually I won my home back. Well, my friends, I have to get back to work. But I want you to remember this. If you don't remember anything else I said, please remember this. It is so very important for us to gather our courage and use our ability to use our voices to fight for what is right. And never, ever sit in silence when you see or you know something is wrong. And that, my friends, is how you can make a difference.
I am for the immediate, unconditional, and universal enfranchisement of the black man in every state of the Union. Without this, his liberty is a mockery. Without this, you might as well almost retain the old name of slavery for his condition. For in fact, if he is not the slave of the individual master, he is a slave of society and holds his liberty as a privilege, not as a right. He is at the mercy of the mob and has no means of protecting himself. It may be asked, why do you want it? Some men have got along very well without it. Women have not this right. Shall we justify one wrong by another? This is the sufficient answer. Shall we at this moment justify the deprivation of the Negro of the right to vote because someone else is deprived of that privilege? I hold that women as well as men have the right to vote, and my heart and voice go to the movement to extend suffrage to women. But that question rests upon another basis than which our right rests. It may be asked, I say, why we want it. I will tell you why we want it. We want it because it is our right. First of all, no class of men can, without insulting their own nature, be content with any deprivation of their rights. We want it, again, as a means for educating our race. By depriving us of suffrage, you affirm our incapacity to form intelligent judgment respecting public men and public measures. You declare before the world that we are unfit to exercise the elective franchise, and by this means lead us to undervalue ourselves, to put a low estimate upon ourselves, and to feel that we have no possibilities like other men. What I ask for the Negro is not benevolence, not pity, not sympathy, but simply justice. The American people have always been anxious to know, what shall we do with the Negro? I have had but one answer from the beginning. Do nothing with us. Your doing with us has already played the mischief with us. Do nothing with us. If the apples will not remain on the tree of their own strength, if they are worm-eaten at the core, if they are early ripe and disposed to fail, let them fall. And if the Negro cannot stand on his own legs, let him also fall. All I ask is, give him the chance to stand on his own two legs. Let him alone. If you see him on his way to school, let him alone. If you see him going to the dinner table at a hotel, let him go. If you see him going to the ballot box, let him alone. If you see him going into a workshop, let him alone. Your interference is doing him a positive injury. Let him fall if he cannot stand alone. If the Negro cannot live by the line of eternal justice, the fault will not be yours. It will be his who made the Negro and established that line for his government. Let him live or die by that.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ray Rickman, co-founder of Stages of Freedom, and this is a good day for me to be with you. My mother raised us never to show anger in public. Black men aren't supposed to be angry. Their anger is multiplied in the eyes of many, and you never know what the results will be. This afternoon, I got angry in the privacy of my own home. Andrew Brown's relatives said that the police shot him 22 times. He had no weapon. His hands were on the steering wheel, and they shot him 22 times. Now, this has to do with 400 years of treating Black people as unhuman as possible whenever someone feels like doing it. 30 years ago, the Supreme Court of the United States basically told juries to give police officers every benefit of the doubt. Do not second guess police officers because you were not there. 2,000 cases in which police have overreacted or actually murdered Black people, and only 7 convictions. The 7th one, George Floyd, last week. Did you get the math? A second grader can get this math, but let's do it again. 7 convictions out of 2,000. You saw the most successful conviction that you've ever seen. Now, if you're my age, you have witnessed 20 of these trials, not in this elaborate detail, and the result is almost always the same. The policeman walks. Now, I want to be careful because we live in a society, sadly, this is not Sweden. This is the United States, in which there are more guns in people's hands than there are people in this country. And the crime rate is through the ceiling in this country. And so people are uptight, and no one's more uptight than police officers who know that if they do wrong, the punishment is probably nothing. Maybe they'd be asked to resign, and then they resign and go and get another job in another town, often in the same state, with a pay raise, because they go from being a regular police officer to being a police chief in a small town. Now, this is absurd. Until 20 years ago, police officers could do anything and get away with it. I was involved in 1982 in a case in which a person, I won't mention his name today, but I think of him often. He had mental problems, and he was in a store he'd been in many times before, and he would take candy and the like, and the store owner would call his mother or wait till the mother came in the store and get paid for it. And this went on for years and nothing much happened. One day, the wrong police officer came and the owner wasn't there, and the young man took a small bottle of spaghetti sauce and threw it at the police officer, and the police officer blew his brains out, killed him. And I tried to get an indictment. This is unbelievable behavior, and it goes on in this country, north, south, west, middle. It is a way of life. Now, I have this theory that this happens because in most cases, the police officer does not give the Black woman, the Black man, often the Latino man, on occasion the Asian man, and on rare occasions, and I'm going to come to this, a white person, a opportunity to explain themselves or to really show their hands, or to prove that what they have in their hand is not a phone. We all have phones all the time. I was telling a young man the other day, if you have a police encounter or you think you're about to have one, you need to put your phone in your pocket as quickly as possible, because someone's going to say your phone. That officer may say your phone was a gun. Thought it was a gun. Now, it's 9 out of 10 a lie, because the phone's red and small and in your hand, and that's not what a gun looks like. But it's a lie. And based on the Supreme Court decision 30 years ago, the jury lets the person go, the police officer go. And until very recently, the thin, thick, vicious, harsh, solid blue wall comes up, and the police officer is protected. I have done about 80 training sessions, formal training sessions with police officers around in Michigan, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Warwick, Pawtucket, East Providence, Providence. I just go on all night. And officers on occasion talk to me. And they often talk to me, either in the hallway or even in the session. And they have this slogan, they yell it at me or raise their voice. I'm going home at the end of my shift, is what they say. And that gives them the right to kill a kid with a phone, as non-threatening as you could imagine. I tell people all the time, if that officer didn't have a certain attitude or too much or so much fear, they would give the kid 4, 5, 6 seconds, and they would see that it was a phony gun and that the 12-year-old had a phony gun. They would see that the person had no weapon at all. They would see that the person's put the weapon down. Now, some of this I remember from years ago, an officer telling me that the person was a criminal and they finally got a chance to shoot him, and they took it. Shot him in both kneecaps while they were laying on the ground. Yes, I'm angry today. And I'm often angry because every 7, 8 days, if you read the New York Times like I do, another Black person has been shot. Another Latino person has been shot. Another Native person has been shot and often killed. Now, I was listening to someone today, and I've believed this for years. Remember, I'm just telling you about the training, conflict avoidance and training for police officers that I've done. So I'm not an abstract observer. I have thought for a very long time that we need to reinvent policing, and more so than has been discussed. And we need to stop certain people from being police officers. Until 10 years ago, the average person who was a policeman was the son of a policeman, the nephew of a policeman, and had not a lot of trouble getting into the police academy and then becoming a policeman. A little company that I owned that turned into a big company. I wasn't the owner when it became a big company, unfortunately. But they had this psychological test. We had this psychological test, and I took it 3 times. And it was me. You took the test and you answered the 16, 17 questions. And every time you said, wow, it said, one of those questions, are you a generous nature? And that was my favorite because it would give me the highest rating. And I used to say to myself, every police applicant in this country needs to take this test. It would tell that you're a racist, that you don't have a generous spirit. And those individuals should not be permitted to even apply to the academy. Everyone should not be a policeman just because they want to be a policeman. Now, that's the first thing we should do. Weed them out before they get in. All this, you're going to train them and change their mind stuff is garbage. I'm the same progressive, liberal, civil rights type now as I was when I was 16 years old. I may be a little more able to explain my views, but I have the same views. And I believe that most police officers who are bad, who are careless, who are racist, who are sexist, are the same people at 48 that they were at 14. And they shouldn't have been permitted to be police officers in the first place. Now, let me tell you another theory I have, and that is that police officers should be asked today, this year, should be asked, should you be a police officer in this city? And I'm not talking about Providence. I'm talking about Baltimore, Providence, Detroit, Los Angeles, St. Louis, New Bedford. Should you be a police officer in this city? Do you like the people? Do you care? Do you want to, avoid conflict? Are you a racist? Now, what's wrong with doing that? And then say, we will help you become a police officer elsewhere. In East Greenwich, wherever it is, in Sharon, Mass. I don't mean to pick on any place. And they may not want you either, because guess what? People of color drive through those towns, even if they don't live there in large numbers. Maybe you don't need to be a police officer anymore. Now, that's something I have been thinking about. Instead of trying to fix everybody, how about get some people to go elsewhere? And get off our police force. I'll tell you something controversial, and then I'll move to Mrs. Roosevelt and housing. We think that we can wait and that things will get better. I don't believe so. I believe things will get better when we structurally change the system, because the forces to be are too strong in the places they exist. The Justice Department is now looking at 2 cities in America. Guess what? I think they need to look at 100 cities. This is a lot of resources, but 100 cities need to be looked at in America. Now, not after the next murder. Now, let me cap this police discussion by telling you that I know scores of police officers who are good, decent, honest, God-fearing, respectable human beings. And so I'm not talking about them. I don't think, but I will tell you that all 4 major incidents that I've been involved in Detroit and in Providence on police matters, there wasn't a single policeman who publicly ever said anything. That tells you something. Someone the other day told me that they believe of the 414 police officers currently enrolled in Providence as police officers, 400 of them live in the suburbs. as far away from the city of Providence as they can get. That tells you something. I didn't tell you what it tells you, because in America, everybody's always trying to move up to the next nicest town or place that they can afford. So some of this stuff's complex, but it needs a review. In 1943, Mrs. Roosevelt sat down with Mr. Roosevelt and said, the president, she used to call him president, she said, when the black soldiers come home from war, 1.2 million of them, I want to see that they get the kind of help that you're putting in place. They're creating the veterans programs. You come home and you get help with education and housing. You get loan programs. They're like 5 things they put in place. Remember, these soldiers, most of them young, are ready to start their lives, and they have saved the nation. Hitler was on the march, and America saved the world, actually. And Mrs. Roosevelt and Mr. Truman and a whole bunch of other people went to the president and said, why don't we do some really cool things, like get them into college? And they went up to Brown University and about, I think, 280 other colleges. And they said, in 1946, we want you to take 45 people. And they're people you wouldn't normally take. And most of them in Rhode Island were Irish and Italian American, who never could have got into Brown in 1946-7. Brown wouldn't take them because it was still an Anglo-Saxon enclave. And so that's what Mrs. Roosevelt did. And these 1.2 million people were supposed to get low interest loans to buy houses. And I've got my figures here of 150,000 Americans graduated from college in 1939, and in 1950, 500,000. You see the sea change? And 55% of that extra number were soldiers. They were veterans. The United States put them in universities around America and paid for them to go to school. In Mississippi, let me get my numbers right, 3,200 young men went to college. Let me look again, 3,200. 2 of them were Black, 2. Now in Mississippi, there were 7,000 soldiers, of which 3,500, who were eligible for this education program, of which 3,500 were Black. So majority were Black, and of the 3,500, 2 got to go to college. And they didn't go to college in Alabama and Mississippi. They went elsewhere because the 2 of them couldn't get in a college in Mississippi. Isn't that sad? Now, what am I telling you this for? I'm going to take you to something unbelievable in a minute. And that is, I was on the radio the other day with a prominent radio person. I'm going to try to be gracious today. I'm tapping down on my anger from earlier. And I was on the radio with him, and he said, you know, you won the George Floyd case. And I interrupted him. I said, no, the nation won. A brutal police officer murdered someone in plain view, and the jury sent him to prison like he should be. It wasn't Black people winning, it was the nation winning, trying to change this country. And he said, as of today, I think we should no longer talk about anything bad that ever happened to Black people. From this day going forward, we're all equal. And of course, the response was unbelievable, because I was surprised that this educated, intelligent man would say something like that, because I'm back to telling you about a young man, white. He buys a house in East Providence with a view of the water through the VA. And 1949, And in 2009, he dies. The house cost $35,000 when he secured it with the help of the government. And he dies, it's worth $440,000. And his son and daughter get equal share, $220,000 each, I believe. And she's lived a pretty frugal life. So now she's got money to travel and have fun. He takes his $220,000, pays off all his debts. And so he's a little free too. He doesn't have the money in the bank up at Fidelity. That's where she sent her money. He sent his to the bank and all the people he owed money to. But both of them at 59, 58 years old are now in a state of ease. Are you listening? That's what discrimination does. The Black folks didn't get that assistance. And so all these years later, they cannot sell their house and help their super middle-aged children. And we can look at this in education. The people who got to go to Brown University and then went on, and I know some of them. One of them became lieutenant governor of Rhode Island. And then the Black folks who couldn't get in Brown University in the 40s. So they didn't become lieutenant governor. So I'm supposed to talk about Lippitt Hill for just a minute, and I will. And that is, Lippitt Hill is a community, lots of folks, and they live on the east side, Camp Street, North Main, Doyle, Only Street. And it's a compact community. And it's it's a nice place to live. And I've examined the records very closely. And my guess is 25% of Lippitt Hill is a slum. But would you like to hear a secret in case you've forgotten? 25% of Benefit Street is a slum. And by slum, I mean they don't really have a furnace and they don't have hot water most of the time. And as they say, the wind can blow through there in the wintertime. So Benefit Street, properly so, I'm a preservationist, is saved. And the 1775 and the 1825 houses today selling for $1 million, and they're stunning. Stunning. Saved. And all of the Black people who lived there, more than 1/3 of the neighborhood, were forced out by federal policy, state policy, and certainly city policy, and forced out. Now, Lippitt Hill's more dramatic. Everybody goes, and immediately, and they rip it down. And there are agreements made. For instance, there are 8 stores put in, and the agreement is that at all times forever, one of those businesses shall be owned and operated by a Black person. Now, based on the neighborhood, it probably should have been 5, 6, but forget all that. 1. So ask me the question, Ray Rickman, is there a Black business at University Heights today? At Lippitt Hill? No. And we can go on and on with what does not happen when someone turns their back. There's no one to enforce it. No. And then the people who own the house, about 14% of people own the house on Lippitt Hill, they were underpaid. They went elsewhere. About 2/3 of them bought a house. The other third didn't because they didn't really get enough money to buy a house. And they got hurt. And they had trouble buying a house because until 1965, Rhode Island, Providence, federal policy, is redlined. And you can't buy a house in the Summit neighborhood. You can't buy a house in Barrington. You cannot buy a house. Racism, racism, racism. Now, I bring this back to people all the time because people get hurt, and then it continues to their children and to their grandchildren. The other day, and I didn't tell this to the person I was with, but the other day we were over at Butler taking a walk. And Butler is on the river, and you walk behind it, and you get to look at the river, and you go, wow, this is beautiful. This is wonderful. And then between a couple of the buildings, you want to go look and see the architectural detail. And I was invited to go look between the two buildings and see the architectural detail. And my mother spoke to me. My mother, gone to heaven, spoke to me. Don't do that, Ray. As children, we were taught to be careful. And Black folks don't go to look at architectural details behind historic buildings. And it struck me. I was just surprised that it struck me. And that happens all the time. I'm in the store and I'm watching people stealing grapes. And I go, ooh, I'd like to test it. Nothing worse than bad grapes. When you get home and you have $5 worth of bad grapes. And my brain says, you don't do that. This is a lifetime. This is stuff I learned 50 years ago. And it pops up on me. Because you don't want to get in trouble for what is normal for most people, but not for Black people. So I'm telling you, now I want to talk about that's all that the bad that happens in the world and how we are affected by it. But we have power and we need to exercise it. I just watched in Georgia, and I don't want to get too political here because I'm part of a nonprofit, but I watched the Democrats elect 2 United States senators in Georgia, 2. And that flipped the US Senate from Republican to Democrat. If Vice President Harris votes, it's 50-50, 50% Republican, 50% Democrat. And to be candid and honest, both the Democrats and the Republicans are walking in lockstep. Now, I'm happy about the Democrats, unhappy about the Republicans, but that's life. People of Georgia did that. They flipped Georgia after 28 years. They flipped it, voting, and many of them young people voting, often for the first time, seeing the power they had. I was thanking 2 people from Georgia today, one online and one on the telephone, because Georgia has probably saved the nation because we needed our COVID work done in that legislation and the funding. And now we need infrastructure changes in this nation, billions of dollars to harness change. And the people of Georgia made that possible. And many of them women and many of them young people. So I always like to give Rhode Island as an example. I live on the east side, and the district that I'm next to votes 5 times in higher numbers than South Providence. 5 times, same number of people, almost 15,000 people for a state rep district. And there you'll get 400 and 500 people in a primary, and here you get 2,500. So when you get ready to elect a mayor in a primary, the people of the east side have 5 times the clout of people of the south side province. And there is a little something holding people back, but not much. There are bad thought processes. And that is, people actually say to me, oh, I'm waiting to vote for president. Well, in the meantime, there's 7 elections between one presidential race and the next one. And you have nothing to say about who the mayor of Providence is because you missed that election. Are you with me? In 2 years, there will be an election for governor. And the state rep district on the east side will vote 2,500, and the state rep district, unless something changes, on the south side, the state rep district will vote 400. We have the power to change that. We have the power. The registration's so easy, not in Georgia, but in Rhode Island. Let me give you one other little example back to historic preservation. They put in a provision that no one on College Hill or in all of zip code number 6, the whole east side, no one could get a low interest loan. No one. And the official reason for that is 75% of the people are wealthy. Now, what does that have to do with the other 25%? They have problems and they need to fix their porch or their roof's leaking. And because they live block 2, 5 blocks, or 2 houses from someone who's rich, they can't get a loan. And that rich person is not giving them food to buy, giving them money to buy better produce at home, Whole Foods. That provision was put in to stop Black people from getting loans to fix their house because the city of Providence was harassing them for whatever violation they had. And so Roger Broussard, realtor, would come along. He was in league with the city. And he would come along and he'd say, I hear you have to fix your porch or you're going to get a big fat fine. I'll buy your house and I'll pay you 10% more than it's worth. And he bought 120 houses like that and chased Black people away. Now, on the other side of town, the west side, you could get a loan in Mount Pleasant, all those places, you could get a loan from the city to fix your house. Racism. I'm sharing the technique with you. Now, the regulation's still on the books. Now, we need to fight it less now. I keep thinking I divert myself from whatever I'm working on and go get that removed. But you can't even dream up all the racist, mechanical, structural things that come to place to make it possible to do evil to people of color. And I gave you the example of the Supreme Court of the United States telling juries not to second guess a police officer, no matter what. And they were trying that in the George Floyd case, and it just wasn't working. The jury paid no attention to that instruction, but that's instruction from the Supreme Court of the United States of America to jurors, Black and white. Let the cop go no matter what he did. I want you to come back tomorrow. Senator Jack Reed will be with us. And you'll see, he's one of my favorite senators. You'll see what he has to say tomorrow at 5:30. And MSA Ufot will be with us. She's in the Georgia Advocacy Program. And you will be impressed and thrilled. Please do that. But in the meantime, would you think about doing more to make structural changes, to make the lives of people of color, I'm talking about the whole span of us, from the first people to make our lives easier, where I don't have to worry about looking at architectural detail that my brain doesn't tell me that I'll get in a lot of trouble if a police officer comes along. We shouldn't have a society like this. And all kinds of people have power. And some big, I watched the Rhode Island Foundation today announce that they have millions to attract teachers of color. And those people are rich who gave them the money. And they have the ability to do that. And I praise them for it. And I praise the Rhode Island Foundation for getting it done. Now, some of us have less power. Maybe our power is only to get our 2 nephews to register to vote. Let's do it. Thank you very, very much. See you tomorrow at 5:30.
Hello, my name is Darius Henderson Jr., and today I will be talking about voting within the age of Breonna. Now, for the sake of this scenery here, this doesn't look too great, so what we're going to do is we're probably going to take this one outside. Stick here with me for a minute. Okay, so now that we're outside in a more stable environment rather than that situation over there, we can now actually have a real conversation. Last year, a gentleman by the name of George Floyd had passed away, and it stirred up a huge uprising of people advocating for the rights of African American people dying to the hands of police officers. Now, I prefer this not be a trend, so we can see less people in the grave and more people living and flourishing in their lives, especially those that are African American now. Cops everywhere have been mistreating not just African American, but everyone. A bunch of white people as well as Hispanic people have also been victims of police brutality, along with other races, as well as religions, genders, anything, you name it. Police officers have way too much power. And the government, or at least the government that the founding fathers had envisioned, didn't see that. They actually specifically designed the Constitution so that the government or people in power didn't have so much power over normal citizens, because that's what they just went through. And it seems like we're following more in what Britain was doing to early America than what we should be doing. We should all be equal. We should all have the right to live and do things we would like to do, and that starts with us, really. We have to vote, right? Of course, we have to vote for the right people. We have to use our voting power responsibly, and we have to actually use the right. We've been given the right to vote, right? My ancestors have fought for the right to vote back in their day because they couldn't. They had no say in what the government did. We can do something. We can actually have a say in what the government does. We need to take advantage of that. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I don't know who to vote for. But there is something wrong with not looking into it once you have that question. Think about it. Sure, from how do I say this? A small scale view, you might not know who you want to vote for, because what you see from the news may not be very perceivable or helpful to you. But if you do some research, you might come along and find the person you vote for. And don't vote for someone just because you're black or you're white or you're Hispanic or you're Jewish or you're Christian. Vote based on your actual personal beliefs. I mean, if someone doesn't line up with what you say, don't vote for them. Don't vote for what people tell you to vote for just because you're supposed to be that type of person. Just because I'm a specific race or a specific gender doesn't mean I have to vote for a specific class or I have to vote for a specific party. But I can do research and see what I would like to see from our government officials and from those who took an oath to serve and protect. With that being said, please vote so we don't have to see any more stories like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, and many others that have suffered as well as passed away due to the hands of people abusing power, due to the hands of people being just blatantly racist, due to the hands of people not following the oath they took. That being said, vote. Because it could be your kid, it could be you next time. So vote not just for you, vote so your kids don't have to see what we see today. This is Darius Anderson. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Trinity Show, and I want to talk to you all about why it is imperative for not only Black people, but Black youth to get involved and interested in politics. Now, I don't want to bore you with statistics, numbers. I just really want to speak from my heart. Now, with the climate we're living in, everything that's going on, I just want to simply say my government has failed me. Not only has my government failed me, but they've failed people who are darker than me. They failed people who look like me. They failed overall Black and brown people, especially Black people at disproportionate rates. When will it stop? It won't, unless people like me and you show interest in politics. Now, I'm not saying run for president. However, sky's the limit, baby. If that's what you want to do, I encourage you. I support you. But be more involved with your local government. Pay attention to who's running for mayor, governor, the House, Senate, president, VP, whatever. Because not only has my government failed me, but our government has failed Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, Trayvon Martin, Philando Castile, George Floyd. The list can go on, and Freddie Gray. The list can go on and on and on. So when will it stop? Oh wait, Emmett Till, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Fred Hampton. Like I said, the list can go on and on and on and on. But when will that list stop?
Hi there, my name is Jerson, and I wanted to say why I think voting matters, especially being like young Black folk. I think it matters because I think one of the most important things that we can be doing is like paying attention to what's going on in like the cities and towns around us, because like we're citizens too, and we get just as much say and like opinion and voice as the other voices in like the cities that we live in, especially like Providence. And yeah, being able to know what my politicians care about and what I have an opportunity to like have a say in locally and like nationally is like important. It's just real, like we need it. Because otherwise they're just gonna keep making decisions without us. And I don't mess with that. And that's why I believe in voting. And I think you got to do it informed. Like I think you got to pay attention and like learn about what's happening around you. And then when you start doing that, you got to find other people that are doing it too. And then
So, yeah, we have 7 questions. We won't ask them all. We're just trying to get a sense of things. And this is for hopefully 400 or 500 people, most of them Rhode Islanders, few people from Georgia, because we have a couple of Georgia advocates coming on. So, if I start leaning big, that's why.
Okay.
So some of this, and I'll start with a kind of story, and you can respond to it in any way you want. I was on radio with a talk show host the other day, and he said, "You won the George Floyd case, and why don't you shut up now?" And I just thought he was talking to me, but
No.
he was talking about African Americans. And he said we African Americans connect our problems too much to the past, and the past is over. And I almost fainted because, of course, all of these things only make an advancement. And if you're not lucky, the advancement can be undone. So I just couldn't understand why a man with a couple college degrees would say that, but it's not an un-American thing to say. Be quiet.
No, the past shapes the present profoundly. And I think we, for many years, tried to deny that, or recreate the past in a non-factual way. The Civil War was not about slavery and the liberation of African Americans. It was about states' rights and the glorious cause, et cetera. The reality is that I think the pandemic first, and then, of course, the tragic death of George Floyd caused us to reevaluate and refocus and realize that inequity has been so baked in, if you will, to our system. It's almost unconscious. It's almost just something that's always been there. But at moments in history, and this is one of those moments, I hope we can see it and we can confront it and we can try to change it. And as a result, build a much more vibrant society for everyone. I mean, this is about benefits to everyone, every American, not just to certain populations.
So we have, I'm trying to figure out, so we have civil rights. I'm sorry, we have nothing from 1877 coming forward. We get the compromise basically taking away Black people's rights that they got after the Civil War. And then we have a war on this for 90 years, to be fair, in which Black people can't vote in the South and can't serve on juries and can't do anything. And Plessy versus Ferguson, that we don't have equal rights and can't even ride on the front of the bus. And this is America. And then 64, 65, we get the civil rights bills from Congress and Dr. King and, of course, Lyndon Johnson. And then the struggle begins again. And I, as a Black American, every day I wake up and I say, are we done with the struggle? And then, of course, I've been, as you know, in civil rights all my adult life. And someone calls me on the phone and tells me about how they couldn't get a job someplace. And in the old days, they tell them, we don't hire Negroes to their face. And lately, it's more complicated than that. So this long question is, why can't we make these laws work? And then I'm going to take you separately, but connected to a Supreme Court that makes it possible to gut the Voting Rights Act.
Well, I think one of the reasons that these laws don't work is, with some rare exceptions, you mentioned them, the Voting Rights Act and further legislation in the 60s, does not consciously and explicitly recognize equity as one of the values that we have to include. We passed, and we're talking about infrastructure bills, we passed these bills, but we don't say, well, is there a real sensitivity to the needs of urban low-income communities and rural low-income communities, or it's just, let's build some super highways to connect the suburbs to cities, and et cetera. And so I think what we're trying to build in now, which is this consciousness of equity and the consciousness of programs that are very helpful. Now, we have examples and again, goes back to the 60s, Title I, which invests federal resources in schools, which previously were massively underfunded, in some cases still. We can make improvements in that, I think. Then we are talking about programs like transit, which in many cases were built not for the benefit or not recognizing the special needs of low-income communities, but recognizing the needs of commuters from the ex-urban to the urban center. So we have to change that thought process. And President Biden recognizes that. And that's one of the major pieces of this proposed infrastructure plan. The other factor too is the fact that infrastructure, or a lot of things were seen as, bricks and mortar, et cetera. And he's expanding that vision to job training, which again, consciously, you have to link up with, how do we provide real meaningful job training and experience to every population, not just those that can, find it easily. Then I was talking about daycare and childcare as something that's fundamental. And for women in society, it really is. And that's the only way effectively they can work. And also we're talking about it, both the state and federal level, of making that type of work financially rewarding, not minimum wage, but a living wage. And many times these jobs are performed by African Americans, other minority groups, because and they're very good at it, but the compensation is just terrible. Then they can't build up the nest egg. And when you step back, as we are now, and look at home ownership among African Americans is much less than amongst white Americans, and why is that? And I think we're beginning to ask those questions. So I think the first step in solving a problem is recognize you have a problem. And again, this recognition fades in and fades out. With the great work of Dr. King in the 60s, it was forefront, with the sense that, we've taken care of that. In the 70s and 80s, the attention drifted to other issues. And I think, again, we're refocusing as we should.
So let's go to the Supreme Court.
Mhm.
They say we have no need for, southern states in particular, only those southern states, that they have to go to the feds and get permission to make voting law changes. And of course, but within 2 years of the court doing it, Republicans start blocking, finding ways to retard the vote.
Mhm.
And I look at this, I'm not in the majority on this. 3/4 of what they're trying to do is just bad. It will not stop you from voting. You just have to, as Dr. King said, the front door is locked, go around the side.
Right.
I think Tracy Abrams and others will figure this out. And it's the spirit that will drive people to go vote. But they shouldn't have to go around the side door. Not now, And so this takes me to the Supreme Court. They're moving to the right, and I'm not going to predict. I never predict what the court's going to do. But I'm wondering if sometimes you need to change the rules. So the rules is we have a 9-person court, and we've been outmaneuvered. And some of it's just luck, or you don't know when someone's going to leave the court for death or retirement. And so now we have a court that is unfriendly. And I don't read tea leaves, so I don't know what the court will look like in 2 years if you did nothing. But should you do something?
No, I think the court has been deliberately shifted to the right. That's Mitch McConnell's major accomplishment. He would even say that himself. The greatest example, of course, was when Merrick Garland was proposed for nomination by President Obama, and Republicans said, no, we will not do it in an election year, even though it was even though it was almost a full year ahead of the election.
Yes. Yep.
There were previous incidents I believe under President Eisenhower, at least one time, where someone was appointed to the court close to an election. It was not a controversial nomination. But then to turn around and say, with Justice Ginsburg's death, oh, no, we didn't really mean that. We're going to push forward a nominee as quickly as we can. It just shows how, they understand that the court is a political as well as a judicial institution, and they use their political clout and there's majority to force it through. And it will have a generational effect. These are relatively young people that are on the court now. So we have to consider, I don't think anyone has settled on the answer, is how do we respond? I think some of it, though, is looking at how the court behaves. The Shelby County versus Holder decision you referred to, which basically neutered the Voting Rights Act and other acts, if they continue in that process, which in my view is as much politics as constitutional law, then we have to consider responses. There's several. I mean, people have talked about term limits for justices, which seems to be, I think an interesting and practical response. The size of the court was not specified in the Constitution. That could be changed. But as you know, President Roosevelt tried that in 1930s, and he was rebuffed by a Democratic Congress. There's a strong sense in the country of that's the way it's always been, and that's the way it will be. Then I think, our challenge really is to, in Congress itself, pass some of this legislation, which is remedial, and to see if the court would accept, a Democratic proposal, not Democratic with D, but Democratic with a little d, Republicans, Democrats, House, Senate, sending them, or at least legislating, and see if they respond in a way that is not very, very clearly political. But this is what we're going to have to wrestle with.
So Republicans have not been following the rules.
Well, they would argue, frankly, to be balanced, they would argue that we did not follow the rules. They were blocking any circuit court nominee by President Obama. So the filibuster, which applied to not only legislation but to nominations, it was Democrats who reduced that, not for the Supreme Court, but for
everything else.
51. So, which I will let you know, what the only rule in Washington that does not change. What goes around comes around. So no shock that when they felt they had to, the moment to seize the court, and for the next generation, they basically blamed us as they lowered the threshold down to 51 for the Supreme Court. But the reality is that now these nominations are 51 votes, and that I've seen it from both sides. I've seen it from Republican presidents making appointments not to the court but to cabinet positions, and Democrats. And I think in a way the old rules were better because you got candidates that had to have a broad-based appeal. And now the danger, and we saw that. I would argue we saw that with some President Trump's proposals. You got very, very narrow, focused political actors with an agenda, and they were able to get through.
I want to, so you answered me on this minimum wage, that people can barely live on $7, $8, $9, $10 an hour. 15 is going to get them out of the basement. I don't know if it'll get them to the any place where they have a view, but you can live on $15, and you can also have a job and a half instead of 2.5 jobs, which destroys your family. when mom's never home. And so do we expect this? Are we going to get this $15 this year?
I don't know if we'll get $15 this year, but I think more and more people are recognizing that $7.25, the federal minimum wage, is inadequate for any purpose whatsoever. And we've seen states, in fact, recently Florida adopted a $15 minimum wage, and that's a Republican state, or at least purple state. And we're seeing it, and I think you'll see the results as very positive. I don't think you'll see the massive job loss that people talk about. I think what you'll see is that with increased resources, these families will have the increased ability to participate in the economy, increased demand, and I think it's something that, together with better education and training, will give a much firmer foundation for advancement and growth and moving into the middle class. So I state by state it's happening. I think eventually it'll happen at the federal level. I think the Republicans at this juncture are talking about, well, not 15, but perhaps 11. Some of them are. But I think the tide is with us. It's not going to happen quickly within weeks or months, but I'm optimistic that we will get some progress on it.
So let me take you to this last item, which is a question, which is a big one. So in Rhode Island, but in Michigan, all kinds of places that I know a little bit about, you go someplace and everybody's white. Everybody. The janitor's white. They have 100 employees in some of these law firms, and when they're integrated, that they have one lawyer, who number one or two in his Harvard law class, and he gets a job, and he's happy or not happy. It doesn't matter. In 5 years, you go back and he's gone, and if you're lucky, there's replacement. But the rates of integration are so small, and that's in employment. And I won't name the corporations, but I could. So we've got 10 corporations. And when I and Rajit Kumar created, and I already knew this, but when we created Shape Up Rhode Island, and I'm sharing this with the audience, I know you know this, Senator, everything's related. So we have a wellness program, and it's for white people because there are no Black, Latino, Asian folks to speak of in most of these corporations, and it's corporate. They're paying for their employees. And so Shape Up Rhode Island, which I loved, ends up 97% white people fixing their health problems. And we would have had to have a different program where we could go elsewhere for people of color because these corporations didn't have any or many. And there are exceptions. TACO, was almost 50% people of color. It was fabulous. Brown University, had Black Cape Verdean employees. But I'm trying to figure out how we're going to get this to change, especially in an era in which the corporate heads of every place, if they make one more Black Lives Matters statement, and I love statements, but I don't see the action. I don't see the follow-up. I don't see the recruitment. And I want to be kind because we have a whole year of pandemic, but I'm just waiting.
Well, no, Ray, I think your observations are right on target in terms of the great discrepancy between white workers and other minorities in many corporate settings and many other settings. I think one is somewhat repetitious, but the first step is to have the companies recognize that, not make statements or about how these courses are wonderful, et cetera, but actually and consciously try to reach out. Part of it is finding, and they're there, the capable, competent individuals of color that can work. And that's something that you have to take very, very seriously and implement it all the way up and down the line. I think you have to design training programs in corporations that help people move up the ranks. And then, the structural issues around this go right back to education, to adequate housing, to all the building blocks, which frankly have benefited the majority population for decades and decades and decades. It's, so people coming out of low income status in the 30s and 40s, but with a good education, and then access to a job and job training, then access to a home. All of that propels the people forward, and we've not done that consistently for minority communities. We have to do it. It gets back to this point of, recognize the problem first. Don't think we've solved it, but recognize it and move forward. And that, I think, is sort of the way forward. And part of that is, it goes back to what a lot of entities are looking for now are people with sophisticated technical skills, particularly computer skills. And again, I'll go back to just, you go into a lot of neighborhoods in Rhode Island, they don't have Wi-Fi signals. They don't have, their home computers. They might be able to go to the library, but et cetera. So, by the time they get to, the college or beyond, they're behind in terms of skills that are now the most marketable skills. And so we have to start very young. And it's, not just, okay, we're going to do an education program, but where's the Wi-Fi? Where's the improvement in the school buildings so that the schools have Wi-Fi, so they have whiteboards, so they have all the things that other children take for granted. Going back to daycare, what about that as a social support for socialization? So when the child gets into school, in fact, there has been consistent studies for the Head Start program, is that when those Head Start students, most of the minority, enter the first grade, they're on a roughly the same level as their other fellow students.
Because they've had preschool.
That's right, but it deteriorates over time because that is not reinforced after school or by the school itself or by the family setting. So, that's a classic example. If we start young and we make the investment, and it's not free, then we will have a chance to give, these companies the qualified individuals that they should be seeking out. And I think the other factor too, and one example of this is our military, which 43% of the armed forces of the United States is made up of minorities, African Americans, Latinos, Latinas, and Asian and Pacific Islanders. That's a significant number. And it's an institution, an organization which is touted as one of the best, professional, efficient, educated they can be. And that wasn't accidental. That was, working, training people within the organization, et cetera. So there are so many factors that shapes this problem, and there's so many solutions we have to take. And I'll just say it again, I'm very pleased that the president is stepping up and saying, listen, now we're not just going to build some roads and bridges. We're going to go elsewhere and provide for the human infrastructure, job training, childcare, access to Wi-Fi wherever you live, access to the new cyber technology. And I think that's a bold turning point he's taking, and I hope we succeed.
So I'm not a Monday morning quarterback person. I say the same thing on Monday that I would have said on Sunday before the game. I'm not a very good whatever. And I wasn't very much in favor of Biden. I thought he was a middle roader, and I I didn't see what was coming. I didn't have a crystal ball. And now I see it's just astonishing, what a Democrat's supposed to be. And so on all of these things, it's the same. So we're talking about Wi-Fi, real simple example. It would be nice if 4 years from today, every Rhode Islander had Wi-Fi. And of course, most of the ones who don't have it are low income.
Yes.
And so it would just be fabulous if in all this money that we're getting from you, from the feds, that we could see, and I tell people I'm not as radical as I'd like to be. There are 100 things in which we need to move forward. If 4 years from today, we move forward in 10 of them, they would help people's lives. But I want to repeat something you said in case any naysayers are watching or listening to you. This helps us all because low-income folks won't be taking money for social services. The ACI will have fewer guests, on and on and on. And also, I've been in environments, and we all have, in which there's less trouble, less struggle, less, everyone feels a little better. And I would just love to live in a society like that, where, the whole nation's Ann Arbor, Michigan,
No. Well, I mean, I think, a classic example of this is Flint, Michigan. Neglecting the piping on their water system. How many children suffered irreversible cognitive damage, which means they won't be effective students, they won't be effective employees. Oh, and by the way, we'll pick up the tab. They will at some point get into the Medicaid system because they can't work, they have a disability, again, all of that. I think people, particularly younger people, are recognizing that. I mean, and I have great hope for the next generation. But to your point about President Biden, I think, as I said previously, he's probably the most prepared individual ever to be elected president of the United States, serving a lifetime in the Senate, then being 8 years vice president of the United States. And he knows from hard-won experience, both, being on the right side of the issue and sometimes on the other side of the issue. But he knows now two things. One is you only have a very brief period of time. You have to be bold, and you have to move quickly, and you have to appeal to what's on the mind of America. And I tell you, gets outside of Washington and all these ideas we're talking about, most people, the vast majority, will agree, say you're right. And there's no reason why, these we should have lead in our water pipes. There's no reason why we should have roads closed because they're, haven't been renovated or renewed in years and years and years. And again, they'll get into, I remember when this country had this and this and this and this. Well, we can do it again, but it's going to have to cause us to stand up and to support, in this case, the president's proposals, and then think even beyond that, because the world's changing fast.
So let me give you a closing compliment. I watch the Senate closely, and there's so many states in which the average person cannot say, I have a fabulous senator. And in Rhode Island, we have two. And it really is good, because I think sometimes I'm listening, and I won't name names, but I'm listening or watching some of those people. The other day, I was so upset with Senator Kennedy, and I wrote to someone at USA Today, and would you say Senator Kennedy, the Republican, who's not Teddy Kennedy? I mean,
no,
that is clear.
Not John F. Kennedy either.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for your, and I do this all the time, but no, thank you really for your service to Rhode Island.
One point, though, is that we have been fortunate for decades to have very decent and very thoughtful predecessors. And in fact, I think Sheldon and I would both say this. We are trying to keep up a standard of Claiborne Pell and John Chafee and John Pastore, and going back to Theodore Green. Yeah, and yeah, again, we've both, Sheldon and I would also admit we've got miles to go before we get to that company. But and then I think the other factor I will say is that we benefit from the ability to stay in touch with our constituents, because this is a small state, because we're home constantly, because we're relatively close to Washington. So that combination of the standards set by our predecessors and the ability to listen to Rhode Islanders gives us an advantage, perhaps. So thank you, Rick.
We are honored tonight to have with us Nsé Ufot. Nsé Ufot is the Chief Executive Officer of the New Georgia Project and its affiliate, New Georgia Project Action Fund. Nsé leads both organizations with a data-informed approach and a commitment to developing tools that leverage technology with the goal of making it easier for every voter to engage in every election. Under Nsé's leadership, NGP has registered well over 500,000 eligible Georgians to vote and has no plans of slowing down. Please welcome Nsé Ufot.
Hello, hi, welcome. It is such a pleasure to be here with you all. I think that we are probably best known for our large-scale voter registration efforts. As it has been mentioned, we registered over 500,000 young people and people of color to vote in all 159 of Georgia's counties. I feel like what we are doing is, changing the culture of voting and changing the culture of elections in our state and eventually in our country. Oftentimes, there is sort of this belief that voting doesn't matter and that it doesn't bring about the change that we seek. And I am here to tell you that I know that that is not the case. Our position and what we often say within the organization is that voting is absolutely necessary, although it is insufficient to bring about the changes that we seek, that it is one of the tools in our tool belt that we can use to bring about the change that we seek. I think about Ahmaud Arbery often as a young Black man going for a jog in Brunswick, Georgia, stopped to view a house that was in the middle of being built and then continued on his run. And he was shot in cold blood by two vigilantes. And it took the prosecutor in Brunswick 75 days and a full-on international media campaign and effort just for them to charge the murderers and to bring them in for questioning. And so when we think about the idea that prosecutors who are supposed to be, protecting the interests of the people, that we are paying her salary, that we paid for the privilege of having someone who would ignore a violent murder, which was caught on film, by the way, we started to think about, the changes that we want to see. I think that, while Georgia made a lot of news in 2020 for flipping the state, if you will, and voting for President Biden and Vice President Harris, and then went on 9 weeks later to make history by sending the first African American to the United States Senate and Georgia's first senator, Jewish senator, to the Senate, that some of the things that we're super proud of is firing the district attorney down in Brunswick, Georgia, again, who had video evidence of a murder and did nothing with it until we mounted an entire campaign. And so, whether or not you are thinking about access to healthcare, and whether or not you are thinking about jobs and the quality of jobs and the raising of the wages, or whether or not we're thinking about how to stop state violence that's visited upon Black people and people of color, that in all of those instances, there are elected officials who are responsible for making those decisions, who we pay. And so thinking about tapping into our power, the power to stop awful things from happening in our community, the power to build the state and the country that our families deserve, that we want to live in, the power to hire and fire people who will go to Providence or who will go to Atlanta in our capitals, or who will go to Washington, D.C., who know our communities, know what our priorities are, and who are accountable to our communities and will go to do the people's work. That is what we have the power to do with our vote. We don't lie to the people about the vote being this magical tool that's going to solve all of our issues. It is absolutely necessary, even if it's insufficient, to bring about the changes. And so thinking about in the state like Georgia, where in order to serve on a jury, the jury pool is selected from a list of registered voters. And so thinking about when the next time there is a police officer on trial for committing acts of violence against a citizen, it is registered voters that will sit on the jury of 12 that will determine what happens and what justice looks like. And so I think that there's a saying that we don't inherit our earth from our ancestors, that we're borrowing it from our children and from future generations. And thinking about the water that we drink, the air that we breathe, the quality of our schools, how we are going to reopen schools after a year of virtual learning. All of these decisions are made by elected officials, and it is our responsibility. We owe it to our ancestors. We owe it to ourselves, to our families, to our friends, to our communities, to make sure that we are sending people, again, to do our work, that they hear from us before elections, that they hear from us after elections, and that they know that we don't do lifetime appointments, that if they are failing or suffering in their job performance, that they can be let go and replaced. That is the power that we have. And when we look at all these anti-voting bills that are being pushed in 47 out of 50 states across the country, it is a backlash. It is, in a lot of ways, a white lash. It is a response to a growing civic engagement, a growing, more sophisticated electorate. We in Georgia had the highest rate of voter registration amongst young people from 2016 to 2020, and we're only going to build on that. That as we are thinking about how our future leaders are going to drag this country towards progress and drag us into the future, it is going to be a combination of our activism, our organizing, and our votes. And so, in memory and in honor of all those who have died because they didn't have access to affordable health care, or died at the hands of police violence, and folks who've become ancestors far too soon, I encourage you, I implore you not to take any tool off of the table that's going to help us build the country that we deserve.
So let me ask, I was impressed beyond belief at Georgia getting flipped. And I hope you hear the beginning of my question. Yes?
I did.
But I'll tell you something most people were not impressed with, but I am. The voting in primaries. Now, in Rhode Island and Michigan, the only two states I really know anything about, Black folks in particular sit at home and say really, I'm going to get in trouble, really dumb things. Oh, I'm waiting for the presidential race in November to vote. And of course, in most instances, not in that race, your vote is important in November, but the primary selects the person for November. And in a state like Rhode Island, where it's at the Democrat for Secretary of State, Treasurer, Attorney General, whatever, whoever wins the primary wins. And you sitting at home, and then you show up in November. Do you have a magic wand? How do you get all those people to vote in the primary? And I'll give a real life example so people, Rhode Islanders, can hear this. In South Providence, a neighborhood 90% minority, Latino and Black, they vote 1/4 of the vote that my district, I live next to Brown University, we vote 4.5 times higher than they do. So this East Side, upper class, rich white folks, they pick the mayors of Providence in a city 51% Black and brown. Because the person who wins the primary gets it.
Gets it, right. Okay. I imagine it's hard for a Republican to get elected in Providence.
In Providence.
Listen, we don't have a magic wand. When I think about our mission is to create super voters, right? And super voters are voters who vote in every election in which they are eligible. And so we talk about it. It is at the core of our plans that we spend the bulk of our time asking questions. The way that we train our organizers and our volunteers is that they have twice as many ears as they do mouths. And so Georgians or people, period, will tell you what they care about. They will tell you what their hopes are, what their fears are for themselves, for their communities, for their families. And so with that information, we regularly go back to the same people and say, there's an opportunity to vote in the mayor's race. There's an opportunity to vote in the city council race. You told us when we registered you to vote at the George Floyd protest or at the Breonna Taylor protest that defund the police was important to you. Now, if it was more than just the slogan, let me tell you that city council are the ones that sort of regulate the police department, that it's the mayor that appoints the police chief. And sorry, my dog is agreeing. But that we listen and we actively go out and campaign during primaries, during general elections, and during runoffs. I think that you can look at the amount of investment in a primary in reaching out to Black folks, reaching out to Latino voters, reaching out to young people. And that is often not a priority. And so I think that the work of the New Georgia Project and groups like ours are filling in the gap. Because again, just thinking about the runoff, for example, in January in Georgia, it was $1 billion raised and spent.
Well, but that's unique now. You're unique, and that was unique. I sent my dollars 4 or 5 times, and I just love the fact that I like both of them. I wasn't deciding who to give the $200 to. I had to give it to both of them. Right. And that was unique because you were busy saving the nation. We needed those 2 senators.
Right. But it wasn't just that, right? It is the level of investment. So again, if you are a community organization focused on voters, like this stuff doesn't happen passively. That this is, you get what you organize for. Listen, a lot has been said about great Rhode Islanders and Black folks who have contributed to Rhode Island history. And so that makes me think about Frederick Douglass, and particularly his quote that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. So our demands are evergreen, are present, and we are making them a part of the decision-making process for voters as they choose who votes in primaries, as well as general elections, as well as runoffs. I think that that's really important. I also think that as civics education is less and less a part of sort of public education curriculum, that again, groups like ours have been filling in the gap. Do people even know when the primary is and why it is important, and the power of their vote in the primary? Who's knocking on their doors? Who's annoying them with text messages, and making sure that we are driving the folks in South Providence to the polls during these off-cycle, salient elections?
So I have always thought you have a problem with candidates, even candidates you like, because they're in office, they're hoping not to have a primary, they're hoping not to have an opponent, and some of them are in office 10, 12, 15, 20 years. And it's a problem because no matter how good a heart they have, they campaign less, they raise less money, they talk to people less. And then Americans, every place, like to vote for the person they know, whether they should still be voting for them or not. And again, I've seen people in public office who all of a sudden are tired. I mean, for health or whatever. Do you, if I live in Georgia, would I get an email once a month from you?
No, you get an email once a week.
Okay. See, because that's what I want to see here. And I tell people all the time, I only have so much bandwidth, but I got to figure out how to get a team together to do what you do. Right. And we should name it the Rhode Island, it's got to be the Rhode Island Project. But how do, so I could go, when I go on your website, which I'm going to do today, I sign up and then you send me stuff. Is that right?
That is correct.
And then I just steal it, take Georgia out and put Rhode Island in.
Done.
And it's good enough that 4 years from today in South Providence, they'll be voting the same numbers as they are in the Brown University area of Providence.
So I don't know
if we do this right.
Because again, we definitely do more than just email. When I think about, for example, the most recent example I have is the general and the runoff election. But, the Biden-Harris campaign on the road in November, and this is not to cast aspersions, I'm just sharing facts with you, didn't knock on a single door. We, after deep consultation with public health experts, with our board, with our staff, with our volunteers, we knocked on 500,000 doors.
You put the mask on and went out there.
Put the mask on, double mask, in fact. And, one was the surgical mask, and then the other one was the New Georgia Project mask. And went out to talk to Georgians and reminded them that there's an opportunity to vote. Listen, in between the November general and the January runoff, the 9 weeks, we made 7 million phone calls. We sent over 4 million text messages, and we knocked on 2 million doors. Right? That our digital ads and creative were popping, that every day there was a message targeting young Georgians, targeting Black and Brown Georgians, talking about the importance of this moment. We have a bold and aggressive research agenda that is at the core of all of the work that we do. It's our position that just because we are Black and people of color, just because we are Gen Z and millennials and some Gen Xers thrown in there for good measure. Actually, our organization, we have members, our staff, we have members of the silent generation all the way to Gen Z. And our organization looks like Georgia. And so we study our messaging, how it's landing, whether or not it's moving people to take action, that we test messages against one another, that it is our position that the enemies of progress and white supremacy and voter suppression have gotten much more sophisticated, and that it is our responsibility as folks who love ourselves and love our people and want to protect us, that our organizing meet that sophistication with our own sophistication. And so, yes, it is absolutely weekly emails, but it's also monthly volunteer meetings and trainings and a social media presence and doing voter education, popular education, so that folks understand what's at stake, and doing it every day.
I love elections. I used to be once a deputy secretary of state in Rhode Island, and I had a little portfolio, the archives, and 5 or 6 things were in my portfolios. And of course, the very best thing was elections. And I find this a difficult place. And I only had that job 2 years. And we did some innovation. Ed Inman was Secretary of State, and we did some innovations. But I saw 25 things that need to be done. And the budget's controlled by the legislature, and they weren't much interested in it. Now, you heard Senator Reed say something fascinating, and I'm repeating it because he was quick and subtle about it. But he kind of said, we don't know what tomorrow is in terms of change, including what we need. And that's always a problem. And again, your opposition, and I can speak freely because it's true, the Republicans are looking at your successes and trying to put up roadblocks to them. Absolutely. So here's my question to you. Do you have innovations? I'm assuming you're hoping to beat them on most of the roadblocks, but do you have other innovations to go around that?
Absolutely. And I would say we absolutely
don't have to tell us, but if they're secret, but
no, they're not secret at all.
Okay.
I think that there are a couple of things. One, conventional political wisdom tells us that, you shouldn't talk about voter suppression, that it has a depressing impact on turnout, that when people hear about how hard it is to vote, that it turns them off. And so one of the innovations is whenever we talk about voter suppression, we also talk about the ways to combat it and the ways that we beat it in the past and the ways that other folks have beaten it, right? And so people feel much more empowered to be like, no, not my vote. My vote, I'm going to make sure that my vote counts, right? And so giving people the reality of what we're up against and a blueprint and the tools that are necessary in order to combat our current reality. This sort of, anti-voting sentiment that's not only spreading across Georgia, but across the country. We build video games and mobile apps.
Wait, I'm sorry, say that again. You did what?
We build video games.
For young people to take an interest.
Yes, who want to learn about how government works and how campaigns work and how elections work. And folks are in their phones, and so we see people where they are. Yeah. One of the tools that we're building to combat voter suppression, again, Georgia has made international news about our 9, 10, 11-hour lines to vote. And so coming up with a system to monitor all 3,000 of Georgia's polling locations. And we're piloting it now, but the idea is everyone has a cell phone in their pocket. And so if you can blindly, without looking at anyone's information, measure how long cell phones are in a particular location, at the Mulberry Elementary School library, or at the, at Brown University on its, with its polling location on campus, whatever, that it will give us this instance, an indication of how long people are in that place and how long the lines are to vote. It's not an exact science, but it helps us deploy lawyers, the press, the police, whatever is necessary in order to get the line moving and to raise the alarm about why people are in line for 8 hours, down at polling location X.
Yeah, well, we're very lucky in Rhode Island. We've only had that happen once. It rained and it was a mess, and people had to stand in line for an hour. And of course, that Secretary of State lost her job over it. Um, we're not used to long lines. I vote in the average of 7 minutes. And I could vote faster, but I'm there socializing.
I love it. And that is not the experience for many Georgians. And so
Yeah.
the work that we do is designed to combat that. And that is why in our anti-voting bill that passed at the end of this past legislative session, they've created 5 new crimes related to voting. And one of them is the crime of giving water or snacks to voters who are waiting in line.
Now, all those issues will go to court.
Yes, we filed a lawsuit in federal court within the hour of the bill becoming a law. And so, I feel very confident about the outcome of the court case. Now, the challenge is it's going to take time to work its way through the system. And so we are, again, looking at other tactics that are designed to sort of mute the impact of these anti-voting bills. And so, there are 1,500 municipal elections happening in Georgia this year alone. And we are going to play in about 150 of them, where we're working to make sure that we are capturing as much information about voters' experience. And again, erecting an election protection infrastructure that will make sure that every vote gets counted while our court case works its way through the system.
Now, do you elect prosecutors?
Yes.
I wish we did. We don't have it. We have an attorney general. He's pretty good.
Okay.
We don't have any prosecutors.
Okay.
There are so many things we need to do to change the structure of government. And, I think you heard Senator Reid hinting, I'm going to be careful about saying what someone said, about term limitations for US Supreme Court justices. And I've thought that for a very long time. And now, of course, you can't get on the Supreme Court if you're 50 anymore. You have to be 45. And, and they're trying to, white folks live longer than black folks too. So they're trying to guarantee 40 plus years.
Control it forever.
Yeah.
And I think that a conversation about expanding the court is worthy. Like the idea that we can't even debate it is a problem to me, that it is some hallowed institution that cannot be touched. The Constitution is a living, breathing document, and so are our representative bodies, and so are our legislative bodies. And so there's precedent for smaller Supreme Courts and larger Supreme Court benches.
Well, so I have to share with you that the Supreme Court is my least favorite government institution. It is the least democratic.
Yep.
The idea, I never liked anybody job for life. I think, it's what I was saying earlier. Sometimes they run on steam. And idea that you should sit on a bench and just, I think, to you. Now, your congressman, you can get rid of, in Georgia, I'd probably get rid of anybody you want, but they're get rid of president, the members of Congress, and the Supreme Court doesn't have on to regulate the final decision when there are disputes. But the idea that they get to do it for life. I also tell people, women 51% of the population, and we have 1% of the court seats. Women have had 1% of the court seats. So that ought to tell you something right there. And enough of me talking. Will you come up and visit us maybe in an off year?
Absolutely. I would love that. Off year, on year. First of all, there are no off years.
Well, we have to find a time when you don't have election next week, but I'm really serious. I'd like to get we have 8 colleges, and get the political science students from all those colleges, and we'll put 2,000 people in our veterans auditorium. to hear you talk. They claim, and I think it's true, sadly, the best voices come from elsewhere. That's what the average people believe. So even though Rhode Island's got 10 voices equal to yours, excuse me for saying it, 2,000 people aren't going to come see them, but they come see you.
Yeah. Well, listen, it would be an honor to join you all for a conversation about our voting past, our voting present, and our voting future. That I think that, there are lessons to be learned and shared. And I want to continue to build this community of democracy defenders, that the right to vote is preservative of all of our other rights. And so you can be a climate change voter, you can be a reproductive justice voter, you can be an education voter. And all of that matters. All of that, those things that you care about, those changes that you want to see, voting is a part of the sort of the strategy that's required to bring about the change that we seek. So, yes.
Now, final kind of comment. I went to Mississippi, March of James Meredith, 500,000 years ago, and badly beaten and all of those things. And it all came from my mother, a 16-year-old kid. And she, in fact, Congressman Charles Diggs asked that I go in his place because they were going to assassinate him. And he told my mother they wouldn't do anything to me. Well, that wasn't true. But that was my mother's heart and spirit, sending her child into a dangerous place to help move the nation. Where did your heart and spirit come from?
My mother and my father. Yeah, my parents for sure. I was born in Nigeria, and we immigrated to the U.S. When I was in elementary school, and we were green card holders. They were very active in their community, and I recall just stuff like the 1996 Olympics, right? It was in Atlanta. There were African athletes from all over the continent who did not have the corporate sponsorships that a lot of athletes from the West did. And so she and my dad and a lot of other sort of activists and organizers from the community pooled their resources, went and knocked on doors at corporations and raised enough money to erect La Maison de l'Afrique, the Africa House. And it was a hospitality suite where there were chefs that were from different countries and featured different cuisine, and an opportunity to show the diaspora that, when corporate America or just corporations don't respond, that the community does. That we love you, we're proud of you, and we want you to know that we see you. And so I have tons of stories like that from my formative years. And we didn't have much, very much a working class, working poor immigrant family. But the idea that we could serve, the idea that we took care of each other, that there was an economy, a caring economy that we built and maintained where we took care of each other is very sort of foundational. And then I guess when we were preparing to become citizens, my mother and I, as I took the citizenship exam, we would quiz each other and prep one another. And so, there is this gap between the rhetoric of American democracy and the reality of American democracy as experienced by Black folks, by people of color, by immigrants, et cetera. And I see it as my work to close that gap. And it absolutely comes from my parents just, instilling in me from an early age that, like, you see something, you say something, you do something.
Yeah. And guess what? Stages of Freedom thanks you very, very, very much. I've loved every minute I've spent with you. Thank you. And thank you for your work, not for Georgia, but for the whole nation and for Georgia.
Well, Listen, it has been my pleasure. This has been a joy. I loved this. I can't wait to come and visit you all in person. And thank you. Thank you for your work.
Goodbye for now.
Take care.